What is going on, people? Anyway, what is going on, people? Hope you're having a great day or whatever time it is. I do hope it is great for you. So, as you have seen in the title, I just dropped my phone on the floor. So, as you have seen in the title, I have purchased a mirrorless camera. I've actually had it for quite some time now, but it is actually the first permanent mirrorless camera I am sticking with because I ended up liking it a lot more than I expected to. Now, I wanted to talk about some of the reasons as to why I went with this camera, why I went Sony, why I went with a full frame camera right off the bat. And this video is really going to be geared more towards people who are even thinking about getting a mirrorless camera, or maybe just thinking about what model to get. Now, what this video is not going to be is me telling you what to get. Ultimately, I believe you should always make your own choices. Don't ever let anybody tell you what to do in terms of, getting electronics or anything, especially not cameras. I feel like getting a camera is a very intricate thing. Do what you're going to do because you want to do it. My opinion. Anyway, let's go ahead and get this video started. Since I am gearing this video towards beginners or people who may be thinking about purchasing a mirrorless camera, I want to talk a little bit about the reason I actually went one for myself. So, for a vast majority of the pictures I take, I have been using one of these, a smartphone. Now, these things are really, really handy. They're really, really great. They're really, really convenient. However, there are some limitations, or pretty big limitations in certain senses, where these that you get here, the lenses on a smartphone, these are pretty small. There is a lot of versatility in the fact that you have different views, different zooms rather. You can take a picture right on the spot very quickly. However, the sensors inside of these cameras are pretty small. And what happens with a smartphone camera is that your manufacturer largely controls the experience you have when shooting pictures with these. Now, let me first say that I have taken some, I think what I would call pretty decent pictures, pictures that I am very happy with. However, there are certain situations where I always wonder if I am taking the most truest form of a picture in that sense. And what I mean is essentially when you pull one of these out of the box, you snap a picture with it, you are getting a JPEG file that is heavily controlled by what the manufacturer deems to be, I guess, acceptable, or I guess pleasing to the eye at that point. So phones like this, the Galaxy Z Fold 5 versus something like the Galaxy Z Fold 4, have a very different color space. And that was something that started to make me a little bit more curious. Now, I do know that there are definitely ways to go into a RAW experience, or the RAW experience on your phone. As you can see here, I've done that with my Samsung phone. However, you will always definitely have the issue of having, smaller sensors here. But anyway, just things I am learning and exploring within this camera journey, and that's the reason I wanted to go for a mirrorless camera. Now on to the first reason, which is actually very extremely basic. So in the consumer space for more dedicated camera systems like mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, from what I understand, you have two different sensor sizes, APS-C sensors and full frame sensors like this one. So what I mean by full frame sensor, of course, for those who may not know, is that you can see here that this translucent, well, maybe that's not the right word, but this part of the camera heavily dominates the space inside here. This is basically your full frame sensor here. And essentially, if you were looking at an APS-C camera, you would see something very, very similar inside this space. However, it would occupy a bit of a smaller space and be surrounded by more of the plastic parts in here. All in all, I really wanted to get the biggest, most common consumer formatted sensor, really. The next reason I went for a full frame sensor, even right out of the gate as being a beginner, is because I intended always to buy full frame lenses. I'm pretty sure that's a normal thing for even when you have an APS-C sensor. But one of the things I noticed while using APS-C sensors, and by that, you'll notice that I said that this is my permanent first camera. I have tried the Sony ZV-E10, I have tried the Sony A6600, and with those being APS-C size sensors, there is the crop factor, and every manufacturer seems to have this, of course. For Sony, with an APS-C sensor, with it being smaller, you have a 1.5 times crop factor, which is more or less a fancy way of saying magnification at that point. So a lens like this, the Sony 90mm macro G OSS f2.8, I probably said that in all different ways. What I realized I was doing is I was buying a full frame lens, but I was not getting the full use out of it. So if I was to put this lens on something like the ZV-E10 or the A6600, 90 times 1.5 is 135, which means on both of those cameras I mentioned, this is a 135mm lens because of that smaller sensor size. Now for me, that kind of did not sit well, because if I'm buying something, I want to get the full use out of it. I want to get the full frame, pun intended, out of it. So that is exactly why I went with a, full frame camera, because now when I go ahead and can't get this lens cap off, embarrassingly, but when I go ahead and, attach this to my full frame camera, that means that this 90mm focal length here is what I'm actually getting with this body as well as this lens combination. So I didn't want to be shortchanged, I guess you could say. Now this next reason actually pairs very, very well with the last reason, and that is the fact that Sony's full frame cameras, at least, I don't know about any other ones, do actually have what's called an APS-C shooting mode. And that means that essentially you're kind of getting two sensor formats in one, albeit with one drawback, which wasn't major to me. But you can see here, this says APS-C S35 shooting, which means this full frame sensor can be cropped in on anyway to basically get you the view of what you would have gotten if you had an actual APS-C sensor. This was definitely something I thought was really, really valuable, because not only am I getting that full frame size sensor, that bigger sensor, but if I do need that extra zoom range, if I do need that extra reach, I can literally simply just go ahead and press a button, which is what I have it set to here, and that goes into that 135mm view from this 90mm view that I was talking about before. So I thought that was a really huge benefit, pretty cool. Now, the drawback, of course, of this is the fact that it splits the resolution of what the sensor can achieve, the full resolution, in less than half. So the Sony A7IV has a 33 megapixel sensor, and when I go into APS-C mode, that effectively goes down to a 14 megapixel resolution photo. This wasn't really a big deal for me, to be honest with you, because if I'm just trying to get some reach on something, I would be really more worried about actually making out what it is versus not being able to take the shot. So I thought that was a pretty good benefit. Next reason up actually has to do with the menu system of this camera, but this is kind of a double reason, I guess. So when I was using the ZV-E10 and the A6600, I actually got pretty used to their menu systems. They did not bother me as much as, a lot of people say that they do bother them. However, the biggest thing that did kind of irk me was there was no touch functionality. And the A7IV seems to actually go ahead and rectify that. Now, this probably seems like a trivial thing, touch versus actually navigating with the buttons, which is funny because I still do it more than anything. I guess I got really, really used to the other navigation system. But the one thing I started to think about, because I had been watching so many videos, so many reviews and all that stuff, is the fact that certain photographers would say, that their buttons broke and everything like that. Some of the buttons on their cameras broke. So I got to thinking to myself, well, if that happens to me and I'm in a situation where I can't do something, let's say, for instance, something happened to this dial. If I needed to use the camera for something, I could actually just kind of go into this menu system here, touch everything, and reconfigure any of these buttons to do something that they did before. So I don't know if that is a, a legitimate reason. We'll see. I am pretty darn good with my electronics. Like, I don't break anything. I don't really take any unnecessary risk or anything along those lines. So the likelihood of this breaking would be more so on Sony than it would be on me. But either way, just kind of trying to think future forward. If anything ever happened, I do have that touch functionality in here, and I can sort of manipulate the controls as I need to. Next reason actually has to do with the body of the camera, and that actually has to do with the kinds of buttons Sony put on the Sony A7IV here. So another camera I did consider was the Sony A7III. I was actually going to go with that before. However, one thing I found online and one thing I read, I don't know if Sony has changed this because it seems like Sony sucks at firmware updates. But one thing I did see on the A7III is that even though it did have a customizable dial here and another dial here, this dial over to the right on that camera was set to exposure compensation, which I do definitely use. However, I don't use it as much. I'm usually shooting in manual and setting my ISO and all that stuff. The fact that you couldn't really change the functionality of that exposure compensation dial on the A7 III was something that didn't sit well with me. I like to have as full control as I can on something that is customizable, which is another reason I stick with the Android operating system. That was probably a jab. Someone's going to come after me for that, but whatever. I just like my devices to be as customizable as possible. So, that was my reasoning to that. So the last reason I'm going to talk about today is actually another dual reason, I guess you could say, and that is the card slots you get with this camera. So one of the things that has become the norm for smartphones these days is the fact that smartphones that had SD cards or micro SD card functionality no longer have that functionality. That's really relegated more for tablets and things of that sort. Now, this is a 512 gigabyte phone only because of the fact that I've amassed, a lot of data, I wouldn't say a lot of videos, but really, really big videos, heavy detailed videos that I take with my phones. So I needed to get a 512 gigabyte phone, and I can't expand that storage at all. Now, the fact of the matter is that obviously when you get a camera, you're going to get an SD card slot, you're going to get one. However, one of the things I found enticing about having two, aside from the redundancy factor, the redundancy factor being if one card fails, it goes over to the other. There's failover, there's RAID configuration for the IT people out there, kind of. The benefit I found to this is the fact that one, I'm able to organize the content that I am creating with my camera a little more effectively. And what I mean by that is you can see here, I have a 512 gigabyte SD card, and I usually keep that in this slot here. And I have a 256 gigabyte card that I keep in this slot here. And essentially I do my raw photos on the 512 gigabyte SD card and my JPEGs on the secondary SD card here. That offers a flexibility I feel like that is unmatched. The second thing, of course, because I said this is a dual reason, is the fact that you do have the ability to use a CF Express Type A card in this slot here. Now, this was something I never really knew about or never really, wandered into, but it is something that came up when I was using the A6600. And what happened was I was doing some long exposure photos and I was using the camera in burst mode. What happened after I took like maybe 20, 30, 40 photos or something, I don't remember what I was doing in rapid succession, the camera had to then stop me from taking photos. It had to hold those photos in the buffer and then write them to the SD card. And that's exactly where that CF Express Type A card sort of thing came into play. Now, CF Express Type A cards are not cheap cards whatsoever, but they are extremely fast. They are, a little bit thicker and, they are a little bit more pricier. That's probably why they call them CF Express Type A, because they're so quick to take your money. But the benefit is definitely there. So I figured, hey, you know what? Let me go ahead and see if I can future-proof. So that is exactly why the Sony A7 IV was enticing to me, because I can use a CF Express Type A card in here, which is extremely fast, much faster than this, which means if I am doing burst photos, no more buffer, or at least the buffer time is going to be significantly reduced. Okay, so those are my 7 kind of main reasons for getting a full frame camera and why I got the Sony A7IV. Now, to finish off this video, I kind of want to elaborate and talk about why I said you should just go ahead and get whatever it is you want for yourself. The fact of the matter is that everybody has different tastes. So yeah, I got advice from some professional photographers. I got advice from people who were amateur photographers. I got a lot of advice in general. The fact of the matter is that not one person had the same exact opinion, but there were people who had opinions that were more forceful or kind of more do this because this is this. And I personally do not believe in there being such a thing as a beginner device. You know, there are only different devices at different price points that offer different features at that point. Some offer a base set of features, some offer more features, then some offer even more features. So at that point, it's not like you get a full frame camera when you master an APS-C camera, and that goes with pretty much anything. You don't get the premium cell phone because you've mastered the, you know, cheapo cell phone or whatever it is. I guess it's kind of like when you go to the supermarket and you're choosing toilet paper. You know, it's like, do you get the 4-pack of toilet paper because you think you're only going to need that 4-pack of toilet paper for a certain amount of time? Or should you just spend the money and go ahead and get the largest pack of toilet paper so you don't run out of toilet paper? And now you all are probably looking at the screen like, what the heck is this guy on? Anyway, that is just kind of my little tidbit at the end of this. And yeah, I would definitely like to hear some comments. You know, are you in a similar situation where you are choosing a camera? You know, have you already chosen a camera? What did you choose? Why did you choose it? You know, from a beginner's point of view. From a pro's point of view, I already know, or a professional or someone who's been doing photography for a long time, I know why you chose that camera, because it suits your needs. But then again, that actually goes right back into what I was saying, right? Anyway, wherever you are in the world, have a great day, a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and I hope there was something in this video that might have been helpful to someone. Peace.